So my name's Tom Jacobs. I am, as he mentioned, Senior Account Executive for ActiveNav. I specifically cover the DoD and VA space, but I've had 20 plus years of business process improvement project involvement, specifically in how to use technology and services to improve content, document, and records related processes within a client environment. James?
Yes, again, thank you everybody for allowing us to be here today. Name is James Jones, Senior Federal Engineer with ActiveNav, and similar to Tom, roughly 20 years in the federal space, actually working with civilian, DoD, and intelligence community, implementing information management control programs as well as records management programs, standing up other ECMs and other type of ERMAs.
So, and after hearing a lot of the speakers this morning, and even some of the past one, the intro part of this is going to be redundant for a lot of people. So I don't want to just review over what everybody I think already knows about the trends, right? More FOIA requests, more data, more complexity. But I think what I will do is we talk about that, as well as some of the the trends down in terms of resources. Nothing new there. Is when we look at what ActiveNav does with our clients, what we're trying to do is lessen the burden by taking the mountain of data that everyone's already talked about today, and being able to proactively curate data sets that are clean, that are have removed duplicative data, that have removed things that are not data within a data set, especially in your semi and unstructured data sets. So when we look at using technology to assist with some of these processes, and the human versus machine concept that's been talked about with with AI or other tools, is if you're gonna take a proactive approach, in other words, you've got these unmanaged data sets, how can you leverage technology that can scale to meet the need? It's the size and volume of some FOIA requests has become quite daunting. Can you do it at the speed that you need, that certainly requires or is significantly better than humans can do, so that you get an actual return on investment? And then obviously, per the last discussion, can we do this accurately, or better perhaps is defensively? So the thing that James is going to get into a little bit more in detail about how we approach this is that, again, if we can use tools to go in, look at these unmanaged data sets, create a clean, organized, well-managed data set, whether it continues to remain in an unstructured environment or it's moved to a structured environment, and obviously that's the general preference for information records governance type approach, that then when you're doing FOIA requests, you're gonna be looking at a more accurate, smaller subset of data. Then further, can you then, using tools within the software, can you then curate the sets of data that you need to meet specific FOIA requests? And the whole idea is speed up that process in advance. Then when you get to using AI or machine learning to really do some of the fine tuning on that, you're not looking at these just massive large data sets. So really, the key is how do we lessen the burden? And I'm going to throw it over to James to talk a little bit more in detail about how we approach this and how we've worked with some of our clients.
Thank you, Tom. And again, Tom, thanks for that overview. And obviously, as we all know, federal agencies are increasing their digital load, and as a result, are creating more and more records, right? We all know this, and the fact is that this is happening at a faster pace. And so it's becoming more difficult for agencies to fulfill the transparency mission that comes with FOIA. It's a huge challenge, and we see it in the field every time we speak to a customer, especially as we see agencies, most agencies at least, doubling their total digital volume under management year after year. This is especially the case with as a result of M-19-21, where we used to see the business process determined by the media of the record. And so the business process used to determine the media of the record. Now we're actually seeing that in more and more cases, it's the opposite, where the media, being electronic or in a digital format, is now determining the business process as far as the mission area is being, as far as how it's being executed. And again, the reason why this is creating such a backlog, especially in regards to FOIA, is because the infrastructure really isn't in place. And so obviously this is it makes it difficult for agencies to respond to FOIA requests in a timely manner. So as well as the increase in FOIA requests that we're actually seeing in general. So obviously the infrastructure is not in place to deal with the new media requirements, as well as the fact that there's a massive influx of new requests since the pandemic, right? Has a lot of people working from home and recent changes in the administration. We're seeing that agencies don't really get around to even tasking the office that has equity in these different requests to do a search until after the responsive records have been destroyed. And so some other issues really that come with the backlog are the increased time cost burden due to limited resources that are necessary to fulfill the request in a timely manner. And obviously that means that these are being exempted with the limited resources that most agencies actually do have. The search and duplication fees in particular are being exempted due to the agency missing the review, decision, and acknowledgement deadlines that a requester is due. And so, again, we really need to figure out how are we going to leverage technology in a way to effectively address these issues. And next slide, please. And so, again, how do we really start on that path of leveraging technology to enable a more effective FOIA program to really meet that transparency mission? And again, if you consider search, right, search of electronic records, for instance, kind of like you go on the internet, you're searching for, let's say, a nice restaurant, that type of search, if you did a specific search like that against an electronic repository, then it's very easy to be inundated, right? And of course, this does depend on the size of the agency, but it's very easy to be inundated with anywhere between 200,000 to 2 million, right, results from that particular search. And so, and of course, all these records are potentially responsive to that particular request, but search is a good start, so to speak, but it's not necessarily feasible to ask the reviewer to conduct a line-by-line review, obviously against that many files, and it doesn't necessarily help to find what you need in a timely manner to ensure that the agency doesn't have to eat the burden costs of fulfilling the FOIA. And so again, we really are looking for a method that will help to effectively curate the data and assist the reviewers to do the line-by-line review as it is needed in most cases, especially when it comes to exemptions or even identifying the responsive records. And so if anything, we really need to leverage almost like a pre-search, so to speak, that can identify records via the objective in-file data, meaning what's the meat and bones of what a document actually is about, to a specific request that's coming in, really before it comes in. And so again, how do we, and then, really artificial intelligence has been a really strong subject really in today's sessions. And so specifically in FOIA, how do we really use that? The questions really come up, how do we really use that effectively to identify responsive records with the right biases? And I think that's really one of the bigger issues. We don't want to add in different prejudices to a particular algorithm that would, negate certain results as false negatives, right? We want to ensure that we have all the right information coming in at the right time. And so considering the time and resources it takes to train these specific models against agency records under the right environment and the data sets, because those things are hand in hand, it doesn't necessarily seem as feasible a way when you consider that FOIA deadlines are within a 30, 60-day window. And in some cases, most of the requests are fairly unique, right? And so, what we really want to ask ourselves in this process is it defensible? No. Is it accurate and reliable, as was mentioned earlier? What's the margin of error? How does it stand up in litigation as relevant evidence? And how do we know that we didn't miss anything with those biases, as I mentioned earlier? And again, these are time-consuming concepts that we need to consider when thinking about artificial intelligence, especially in regards to defensibility, this is where we really will need the human intervention in collaboration with AI to validate, a defensible approach to FOIA analytic, right? So the analytic processes. And so, especially if you desire to use AI as evidence, there's some questions you need to ask. Obviously, is it authentic, as was mentioned earlier? Where's the proof? And of course, has it been peer reviewed? This is always critical from the last presentation. And so, as especially we here at ActiveNav, we are continually doing research and implementing solutions for the long and short term to leverage concepts within the framework of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and of course, other technology-assisted review platforms. And we really are starting to understand how to leverage these concepts and technology to work with people, such as the SMEs, to make it faster and better for agencies as they implement these different solution sets. And so even as we have here in the diagram, of the presentation, we typically start with the inventory, and our approach has been to analyze information at rest to ensure we're not duplicating or taking unnecessary resources. So again, that's at rest where it lives. We're not moving the data, we're just analyzing where it lives. And of course, this is where we can start to leverage the previously mentioned frameworks within the AI, ML, and technology-assisted review platforms to conduct an end-file analysis, meaning that we're asking the algorithm to read the document similarly to how a human would, and then from there we are collecting the major themes and concepts and summaries of what a document actually is, is about, and then also curating that with the other sets of basic metadata, even patterns if necessary, that we want to identify within a document that could potentially be responsive. And so this is where we're starting to build that inventory for conducting that pre-search. And then from there, we want to clean that data, right? So we want to be able to isolate the valuable information from the low value information. And of course, this is, we at ActiveNav do have rules for doing that, but of course, we always encourage SME review when it comes to this process. But really, this is where we really want to incorporate the human will be within the modeling aspect of that. So we have the inventory of metadata and in-file meaning of the different documents. And so what we want to do here is incorporate the SME or the reviewer to say, hey, product, what do you actually have within your inventory? The product will say, well, I read all these documents, I know what they're about. And so therefore, the SME will say, well, I have a FOIA request that's about this. What can you give me? And then the machine will say, I have this specifically, right? And so as we're modeling the different policies as far as how the machine is actually going to review the inventory, and then from there present findings based on a specific request, this is where we can start to work on that refinement quickly, really, and then quickly implement as well that within the tool to start the categorized section, and really I should probably even say auto categorized section of this process. And then from there, of course, the migration and reports is dependent on really the workflow internal to an agency as far as whether or not they need a staging area to review the information itself. Anyway, so we can go to the next slide, please. And so again, we want to give you guys a good start, and of course, we're not necessarily going to give the best practices in this area because it's fairly new. And of course, the culture and the access to leadership is always different per agency, but at least we want to suggest what a good start might look like for your particular agency, especially since most FOIA programs are decentralized in their operations. And so we were taking that into consideration when speaking about these next topics. And so, again, we've seen that the most effective approach to lessening the burden do come down to people, process, and technology. And in this principle-based perspective, it really does aim to find the balance between those three legs to help drive effective change. And so we've seen that a lot of the issues in lightening the burden are based on on the enforcement and adjudication of FOIA, but it's primarily involved, the issues are primarily seen in the managerial and resource allocation areas. So, for the FOIA transparency, obviously is a system that is set up because we want people to use it, but obviously the more people that use it, it's going to take more resources to manage it, right? So it's a catch-22, right? We want people to use it, but we need more resources to enable people to use it. And so in more of a decentralized perspective, getting around this problem, we first recommend determining if the agency has resources to, create, modify, customize tools that fit within the current business process, or again, if the agency is resource restrictive or conservative with their budget for FOIA and the transparency mission specifically, whether or not, we can now fit the process that's currently in place around the tools. And again, what that really means is that we're integrating the transparency mission or FOIA with the applications currently in the agency's IT portfolio. So we're not adding anything new. We're just changing the way we do things to better leverage our current IT assets. And so, again, matching the people, the process, and technology tasked with the job of fulfilling transparency is going to be very important. And again, this is where we recommend even incorporating working groups of some type to help enable that process. And so, and again, an example of that, especially when it comes to resource restrictive agencies, is that if a court ordered an agency that made a decision to a requester that of course, the agency stated that they weren't going to release certain documents, but they were then ordered to fulfill that request, and they currently do not have a method of really rapidly identifying that information and then presenting it to the requester appropriately, then that's obviously going to increase that's going to be a massive pull on vital resources. And so this is something that we're recommending that we can potentially try to get around. And so again, how are we going to leverage these tools the best possibly to get the best results quickly? And of course, how do we do this in a scalable way? And what we believe is that it's important for agencies to really start at the ground level, and it's important to increase the enhanced use of affirmative and proactive disclosure by first starting at the policy review, right? So we want the agencies to start to look at their policy and bring the FOIA into the fold, so to speak. So again, with either new policy being created for a particular mission area, or even a legacy policy that's about to expire, 17 years old, or whatever the threshold is for that particular agency, we want to bring FOIA into the fold to ensure that they can review the identified information collections within a policy document, or the reports control, or the called out records, or the called out requests for information, and also the submission of information that are laid out within policy. And so this is to help determine if these specific information collections and reports controls are actually exempt, or even if they're responsive to FOIA requests. And so again, this is we're all obviously assuming that all records created by an agency are transparent, and that the obligation and the burden to prove that they're exempt is on the agency. But this is obviously an attempt to be a bit more proactive versus reactive to potential requests coming in for a specific mission area, so that we're not playing catch up, right? So that we're not being reactive, playing catch up all the time. And so again, this enables the offices responsible for fulfilling the mission areas to be prepared for a rapid response to future FOIA requests. And I think this also really comes down to, again, that inventory where we are starting to identify relevancy and relationship within a collaborative approach to utilizing things like natural language processing and statistical clustering, unsupervised learning, things of that nature, to not necessarily start to task the algorithm or the AI to fulfill a specific job, but at least help us to understand what our content is actually about. And then from there, we can make inferences into or add to the policy specific metadata criteria to ensure that we are refining the results that we actually see, and again, incorporating the human. So what this means is that, again, it's not based on retaining a full text index with that initial inventory. A lot of ECMs kind of go in and they store everything, and that's not our approach to that. And so, which is because it's very resource intensive and not quite scalable due to the fact that, in some cases, the full text index is close to 100% of the volume of data under management. But it's more about conducting a full text analysis of that information, and then applying thematic analysis and using natural language processing, statistical clustering, things like that, in place where the document lives to identify the key terms and subjects and categories within a document to only retain that relevant metadata according to the policy, and again, that modeled policy that we've created with the SME to enable pure curation of the digital inventory. So again, this inventory approach has proven to show a massive reduction as far as the index size is concerned between, quite frankly, it's a little closer margin than this, but I'm just going to say between 90 and 98% savings on resources in regards to that, maintaining that index as directly, and of course we see it that it directly aids FOIA analysts actually in the specific phases of collection, processing, review within FOIA and e-discovery. And so again, we believe that, the best approach to lessening the burden is to incorporate the human and conducting auto categorization with the policy agnostic data modeling tools that might be available, right, against that inventory, the pre-discovered metadata facets, again, according to policy. So and an added benefit that kind of comes with that of identifying the responsive information is obviously that we get to identify the FOIA exemptions as well, and it's actually a project that we're currently working on to find the exemptions, and then from there present the relevant metadata to say, well, this document had this inside of it, and that's potentially an exemption. So therefore, we want the reviewer to do that line by line on this document right here versus that 200,000 to 2 million document that we had before. And so again, this has been a little bit of a high level review of everything we do over at ActiveNav, but to bring it down a bit, we can speak to it in a couple of phases. Again, really the first step that I think would be good would be, really to start to have a more of a proactive approach to identifying FOIA according to the business area, business products, as well as specific policy review. And then from there, the next step from there was obviously to conduct a strong, relevant metadata inventory from the agency's electronic holdings that identify the themes and objectives and facets within a document, peering into the relevance and relationship a document has with specific requests. Again, this is utilizing the different aspects that we spoke of earlier, but typically pre-trained algorithms, and because again, that whole point of the algorithm is strongly dependent, especially in regards to training, is strongly dependent on the relevant data and the biases put into that particular algorithm. So it's going to be critical that these things are really what you want, and that they've again been tested and proven via peer review, what have you. And then from there, create a collaborative space for different working groups tasked with identifying offices that can at least begin to translate the relationship between FOIA, business process, mission area, as well as data modeling according to policy. And I think this right here is a really effective strategy around responsive records, as well as identifying the exempt records within an agency's holdings. And so again, that's really all I have on this. I guess you can go to the next slide here, but Tom, I'll kick it back to you if you have anything else to speak on it.
Yep, thanks, James. And so kind of just circling back around a little bit to what we do, we work with a number of DoD and civilian agencies to help them discover, categorize, and govern their unstructured and semi-structured data. And while it may not be quite as exciting as some of our prior presenters, we kind of do the dirty work, the heavy lifting below the scenes, so to speak, to make it easier for the subject matter experts to do their job. And we've got clients that specifically use our tools for primarily for FOIA request management, and again, this kind of mountain to molehill approach. We certainly have clients that use our technology for the overall information governance and records management practices, and really that proactive data management, because if you've got a clean or cleaner data sets that are under ongoing governance, you're just better off to begin with. And and we certainly have seen some recent examples with a DoD client that used our tool for the cleansing, the organization and migration components that we talked about, but then they started using it for their FOIA processes. And late last year, they started using it for managing, the bulk sort of data searching for FOIA. They've reduced their backlog to where in June they'll be without any backlog. They've reduced their staff time by over 50%. And the caveat there is they still have a lot of paper documents. They expect that to decrease significantly once they get all their components digitized. All we have really now is just to thank everyone for their time. And if we had any questions that were out there, we certainly can take them in a couple minutes that we still have.
Thank you, Tom and James. Yeah, in the 2 minutes or less, it's from a process standpoint, how do government agencies get started with implementing something like this?
Well, I think the big key that we see is stop the analysis paralysis, right? If you get in and you can understand what data you have and do it in an efficient, clean, effective manner, then you can start to more effectively jump into a FOIA, more automated FOIA request process. But what we see all too often is that people just they've got all this data, they know it's unmanaged, and they don't know where to start. And if you have a map of the data, you've got the core metadata associated to it, then you can start making real decisions about getting it cleaned up from there.
All right, thank you, Tom.